Okay, where are we today, Jim?
Well, today we're looking at another part of Wisconsin here. We're not far out of the Arcadia and the Whitehall area here. We're down in the refuge here by Trempealeau. And we're going to talk a little bit about the weather and some of the things that have happened here in Wisconsin, because we have 4 seasons, and you know how weather can change here.
That's right.
Within a day or two, things are totally different.
And it can change in a lot faster than one day.
You betcha.
Yeah.
They said, just wait a few minutes.
Yeah,
Things will be different.
it'll change, that's what they say. So we're here at the Trempealeau Refuge, and it's October, and it's a beautiful day right now, and I'm hearing waterfowl and things in the background, but it can be deceptive. A beautiful day can change.
You betcha. I said, especially in our weather here, I said many times, I said people just kind of had to rely on the old adages, how weather went. They would, oh, the red sky in morning, you know, sailor's delight, then at evening, you know, whatever. But I said the Weather Bureau itself was not really established well. So back in the 1930s, around 34, you only got 2 weather reports in a day.
Right.
You know, and I said they were not overly accurate, because they had the information, but they did not have the computers or the technology to compile this information, to look, well, if it does this, here is what's going to happen. So things are telegraphed all down into Chicago. And then Chicago then issued the weather report for the Midwest. So a lot of the reports they got, like going into Michigan, were already weather that had passed our system. But they didn't have the technology to go back and look what these cold fronts and these other warm fronts, whether it was going to cause, what future weather is. Then in 1938, they started issuing weather 4 times a day. You could have a morning report at 8, then you, excuse me, at 4.
But if you didn't have a computer, how were you getting these reports?
It was by telegraph, and it was sent to various places. One, you could find it in the newspaper. Which was maybe pretty late by the time you got it.
But they'd printed it the day before.
It was published a lot of times in a little pamphlet. They put a sign in the store window.
Oh.
Most of the people would stop the weatherman, not the weatherman, the postman.
Yeah.
Or ask somebody in town, well, what's the weather going to be? Well, I heard this, or I saw that, you know. But there was no communication per se like we have today, instant on. We look and whether storm cloud going to be here in an hour and a half. No, they just kind of went by the seat of their pants, more or less, and it looks like it's going to be a nice day like we figured today. But I said, weather did change, weather improved. But because I said that the weather the way it was, a lot of people got caught out in these bad storms. And I think we have a list of some of the bad storms that Wisconsin has had, and Nancy's going to maybe rattle a few of these things off.
Well, there was one in March 1881, that's a while ago. 28.5 inches of snow, making drifts 20 feet high, and that, of course, stopped the trains.
Well, I suspect so.
Yeah. And it said Madison reported 4 foot of snow on the level.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of shoveling coming up.
Well, I would guess so. And then in January of 1947, there was 18 to 27 inches of snow with 15-foot drifts. And this stopped the road traffic.
Well, I suspect, yeah.
Yeah, that it would. And then in November of 1975, there was another 10 to 14 inches of snow, and there was wind with that, like 40-mile-per-hour wind. And this was the storm that took down the Edmund Fitzgerald.
That was in our lifetime, and we remember that.
On Lake Superior, the big, heavy ore ship. And then in March 1997, 25 inches of snow. Hurley, Wisconsin, had 275 inches of snow that winter. But if you live in Hurley, I think you expect that.
I think, it's like off of Lake Erie. I think you kind of expect some of these big storms, but
and
unreal.
Then 1999 January, 20 inches of snow, 8-foot drift, 60-mile-per-hour wind. And it said 100 people died, mostly in car accidents.
Yeah,
because they couldn't see.
Yeah. No, I said with the interstates, a lot of people don't remember to slow down. I said winter time. I said it's not the time for speeding, but there's always somebody's got to pass you.
So then in February of 2008, There was 20 inches of snow, and that closed Interstate 90. And it said people were sleeping in their cars.
Yeah, well, we still see it in the Dakotas a lot of
Yeah.
times. They'll still announce that these people, like, are stranded on the interstate.
Yeah,
So it
yeah.
happens.
And you know when you're getting into a place that has serious snow, when the on-ramps to the interstates have gates that can come down and close things off. You know, they're not fooling around then. So then January and February 2011, 26 inches of snow fell in 24 hours.
I kind of remember shoveling that.
And one that we're going to talk about today that was particularly nasty, and people remember it. Sometimes they call it the duck hunters blizzard storm, and it was on Armistice Day, November 11th, 1940.
Yes, and I said there was a pretty bad storm, and you have to remember it's over 80 years ago, and we still recall what happened on that day.
It was that bad.
I think that'll be our topic today to talk about.
Yeah.
Let's meander a little bit more here in the refuge and see what else we can pick up here.
Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about something that happened, what is it, 80 years ago now?
80 years ago, I said that on Armistice Day, 1940, many of the people around are big duck hunters, you know.
Are you a duck hunter?
No, my rotors are shot. I can't fling one up fast enough there to get a round off. But I said many of the people were duck hunters and big fishermen and what. And they had an Indian summer, much like we're just coming out of right now.
Yeah.
50-degree weather, and people were all happy, I said. And when the snow started to come in, they said the weather report that they did have said a cold front is coming in, and that was a good sign to the duck hunters that ducks will migrate, because they had not migrated because the fall had been so warm, so they still were staying north.
Okay.
And with the cold front coming in, everybody hit the river early in the morning. Because the weather was nice, they dressed lightly, because the weather was right around 50 degrees.
Yeah. And this is before the days of the Carhartts and, and all the super insulation.
They maybe had the nice woolen jacket, but that was about it. They didn't put on too much for clothing because the weather was in the 50s. And they got out into these bottoms, set up their blinds, threw out their decoys, waited for the ducks. And about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the ducks started coming. And they were coming. And people could not believe the amount of ducks were coming. And they were low.
That's not a good sign, though,
They were easy to get, and we could get our limit. So everyone decided, let's just stick it out, and we're going to get our limit. But pretty soon they noticed that the water was starting to get rougher. Temperature started dropping.
Because it had been, what, about in the
it was around 50 degrees.
Yeah, so that was...
And within a 4-hour period, the temperature dropped over 25 degrees. Wind chill dropped about 40-some degrees.
And there was a short period of time when it dropped.
Within 4 hours.
Yeah, that's pretty fast.
And the waves started picking up on the river, and people realized that, wait, we better head for home. Well, because they were in the backwaters, in these refuges, which were kind of flooded in here because of the dams in the 38, the water was not very deep, so to get in these back sloughs, they had really shallow boats. And when they got in these boats, got out in the water, they start capsizing, they start filling. The waves were up to 5 feet coming into the boat. So a lot of the hunters were stranded on the islands. They could not get off. It started to rain, started to snow, and they couldn't get away to get across to the mainland. So they started to stick it out. We're going to stay on the refuge. We're going to stay on the bottoms here on these little islands all along the Mississippi.
And I got to stop you just for a minute, because they were saying what a duck hunter had with him back then.
Well, very little stuff.
Very little, right.
Very little. I said a few people were a little bit more inept, I'd say, adapted to the bottoms. They did bring along a little extra equipment. Some had a little dry clothes. Some did bring some camping equipment. just in case there would be something wrong.
that
But
was
the weather
good.
had been so
Yeah.
nice, most weren't prepared, I says. And when the weather did turn bad, some hunters were left standing in knee-deep water out on the islands. And with 5-foot waves, 3-foot waves, winds picking up and temperature falling down, things looked bad for the good guys.
So they're standing out in the water. Aren't they supposed to have duck blinds or something?
Well, it didn't make much difference with the wind and everything got covered with snow. It started filling in, and there was literally no place to go. You were stuck. You couldn't get off. The water started to freeze. So I says the Corps engineers out of Fountain City sent some rescue boats, some tugs out, because people that were on the island side, you were stuck out there. The people that are on the mainlands couldn't get a boat out because their boats were getting swamped because the waves are so high. And it came up rather fast, you know, within a matter of a few hours. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late to try to get help out there. So the boat was trying to pick up people all night. But I said they could not get there in time for some of these hunters, and over 150 of them perished. I said they froze to death on the
Yeah.
rivers.
What I read that one guy was talking about, he said at first it was kind of misty that morning,
Yes.
and then it started to get sleet, and then it turned to snow, and the temperatures and the wind picked up.
And they say the air was so thick, it was so wet, it was hard even to breathe, to catch your breath, because it was, you know, a bad predicament for these people. So I said the next morning, as soon as possible, Max Conrad came out of Winona with his airplane.
Well, let's explain who Matt Conrad
Well,
is.
Max was kind of an independent airplane enthusiast, let's put it that
Okay.
way. They've got an airport in Winona named after Max.
Right.
And he had a little Cub Cadet plane, and he did a lot of flying around the area, and he was teaching people how to fly and things like that. And when he had the opportunity, he said, I'm going to see if I can help these people out on the river. So he took his plane out, the one that they could get out, because there was snow all over the airport. And he had to have men literally help hold the plane down, turn it into the wind so he could try to get up into the air.
Because the wind, they said, was really strong.
And he said going into the wind, he could do about 20 miles an hour, and going with the wind, he could do over 100. He said
Jeez.
it really took him fast. But he said he was going out and he was showing these hunters this way. He was showing them, go this way. There's a tug you could get rescued if you
Right,
go here.
right.
He was telling the rescue crews where people were located. And he was throwing off burlap bags with aids in there. There was warm clothing, matches, equipment that
Cigarettes.
you could... Well, yes,
There
cigarettes.
was. I saw a picture of what
So-
he was throwing out.
To help these hunters that were stranded out on these islands. And Max said, he said, you could see there were people froze.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I said, Max and those, I said, had organized search parties, and different people were going out there. And to talk to some of the people that survived this storm, there's very few left. I mean, we're talking 80 years ago.
Yeah.
But there are people, our generation, that had parents that knew of the storm.
Right. It was infamous, wasn't it?
There were infamous stories, let's put it
Yeah.
that way. You know,
They said that people would try to get under their boats, and the boats weren't very big to begin with.
one hunter figured he could take the islands and take his boat from the island and get to the mainland. So he said he jumped in his boat, he started going and was swamped instantly. He said, so he pulled it back where he was, and then he says, I tied all my equipment into his boat. And he said, then I turned the boat upside down, carried it into the water. And he said, as soon as I got in the water, he said, the wind took me. He said, and I hung onto the inside of the boat. And the waves took him across the Mississippi, and he got to the Wisconsin
Oh
side.
my gosh.
And he said there were people waiting on the Wisconsin side, hoping that their husbands and sons
Oh, I
would be
can't-
coming home.
I just can't imagine.
And they pulled his boat out, and this guy was on the bottom, froze. He said, I couldn't even let go of the boat, he says, because I was so frozen. But he said he did survive. And there are a number of individuals that can tell stories. I talked to David Brunk down there by Dodge. David is, I think, 93 or 95 now, right in that age. And he says he can remember it, he says, because it started to snow. And he said, we were kids and we were so thrilled because there was going to be sleigh riding, we were going to be ice skating. He said, we're going to have such a great time now. He said, it's finally winter. He said, we've had wind in summer all fall, you know. And he said, but then he said, when Pa didn't come home, he says.
Was the dad duck hunting?
His dad was duck hunting.
Oh, no.
And he said, so we prayed all night.
I'll bet.
But he said, Dad was with 4 other guys. And one of those guys had a hatchet. And with that hatchet, he said they were able to make a fire. And he said that's how they survived.
Because they said that a lot of people were trying to light fires, but they didn't have
Everything
dry
was
wood.
wet.
Their matches were wet. They
There
couldn't
was
do
nothing
anything.
nothing that you could get going if you didn't have the proper equipment.
And they said that also a lot of people had, their dogs with them for retrieving the ducks, I guess.
Yes.
And they were hugging those dogs and trying to stay warm.
There's an interesting story written by John Steffes. His dad's name was Bob. His grandfather was Nick. Nick owned a auto repair shop in Winona. And John, being a grandson here, he wrote a book. He's out of Winona. It's called Wings on the Wind, I believe. And anyhow, he wrote this book about his father, Bob. And Bob was a pitcher for Winona City League.
Oh, baseball.
Baseball.
Uh-huh.
And he says there was a Ed Majerski, I believe is his last name, Wojcicki. He was from Minnesota City. And they were kind of competitive always in baseball back and forth. And young Bob was 16 years old. He went out on the river. And he says he got his ducks. He started shooting some ducks, and he had a little lab. That lab was retrieving. He was only about a year old. And he says when he went for his second or third duck, he said the waves got so bad his dog almost drowned.
Oh my gosh.
So he went out and he got his dog with his canoe. And he says he barely got the dog to land. And he said here was 2 men struggling in a boat, and their boat was going under. So he went back out and he helped them get to where he and the dog were.
Was he swimming or what?
No, he was in his own canoe.
Oh, okay.
And he just was lucky enough that he could bring them in.
Yeah.
So he got them here, and here was Ed, the guy from the competing baseball team.
Oh.
And his buddy. Well, his buddy unfortunately did not make it. He drowned.
Oh, no.
But these 2 men had to stay on the island overnight. They had to somehow have fire. But Bob happened to be in the Boy Scouts. And he said one time he got kind of stranded in the woods, and he kind of learned from that to always be prepared. So he had some dry clothes along. Wow. And he said he had a little bit of fire starting equipment. So he said in a plastic bag. So he said, well, we were trying to start fire, but we couldn't get anything really going. But Ed said he had a metal container for his shotgun shells. He took the bullets out, and they put some cotton in there that Bob had in his Boy Scout outfit. And then they said the boat motor had the gas can right in the boat motor. He said we took a barrel from a shotgun, we stuck that in there, and then we covered the end, and you could bring some gas out. We put it on that cotton, and we were able to get the cotton on fire. And there was an elm tree that was down. He said they peeled the bark back, and they got some shavings. And they built a fire.
Wow.
Then they put a canoe up to hide underneath there, and they leaned the dead feller on the back side of the canoe. And the dog and Ed thawed out, and Bob was fairly good at the time. So then they were taking turns watching the fire overnight. So they did that fairly well until, he says, about 2 or 3 in the morning, he says, and then Bob says, the water is coming up onto the island where we are, so they had to move. Well, so they moved to the other end of the island, which wasn't much better. But he said we were kind of dry. And the Max flew over with a plane. It was getting daylight. And he threw a satchel out. So he sent the dog, go get it. And the dog went out there, broke through the ice.
Oh, geez.
So then he went out to get the dog, and he broke through the ice. Oh, no. Bob was. So then Ed went with a long stick, and he got him back out.
He got it, yeah.
Well, then Bob was froze out, but they had moved, when they moved from the south end of the, or north end of the island to the south end of the island, they took some coals in that metal box. So he was able to start another little fire. So they're warming the dog, and Bob were warming up. And Ed said, I'm going to go look on the other side of the island, on the main side, and see if there's any possible way we can get off, how we can get out of here. And he come back, he said, I got good news and bad news. The good news, he said, there's a rescue party right inside the island, they're coming. The bad news is, he says, you're going to live, and I'm going to beat you in the next ball tournament. But I said, there were all kinds of stories like that. But I said, my dad told, he says, he and my uncle were making wood. He says, nice day in the morning. I said, but Grandpa had a set of horses he had bought from out west. And he says, those horses, he says, we got them harnessed up all right. We couldn't get them out of the barn. Damn horses, he said, we just had a fight. He said, we finally got the horses out of the barn, hooked up to the wagon, and we went up in the hill. He says, we make some wood. Well, he says, making wood, you get sweated up and everything. He said, it started getting a little windy, but we didn't pay attention. It kind of started raining. I ain't so bad.
Was this by Dodge?
Whistle Pass.
Oh no, Whistle Pass.
Right
okay.
where we started the last video.
Okay.
By great Uncle Andrews. And he says, it started getting, he says, colder and colder. And finally, he says, my Uncle Harry says, Dad, he says, you know, maybe we better head for home. He said, well, we jumped in that wagon, and he said, you would not believe how that wind had picked up and cold. He said, we just loosened the reins and we hid behind underneath the seat, he said, in the wagon, and the horses went right for the barn. He said, the horses were smarter than we were.
Well, they knew it was coming.
Animals can sense bad weather.
Yes, they
I
can.
said, they know what's going on, but I says, sometimes people aren't the same. I said, Victor Pulaski happened to be hunting down in Dodge area, and he says, out in the bottoms, and he said, the weather turned nasty, and he said that he was lucky. He said, I got off the river before it turned really bad. But he said, the wind had picked up, and he said, I got on the dike, and we're heading back for the car, and it was so windy, he said, that dog laid down, and he was crawling on all four, because he said when he stood up, the wind would push him off the dike. He couldn't stand up there no more, because the wind had gotten too bad.
So they, where were they hunting? Here by Winona or down here by the refuge?
Up along Winona. This storm in 1940, the Armistice Day storm was over 1,000 miles wide. It started down from Kansas up into Michigan. Gee. Lake Michigan, 2-3 ships went down.
Yes, 3 of them. I
went down. I said, well, all the men went with them. But I said, because there was waves up there, I think they said 20 feet high or something like that. I mean, one ship broke in half and 2-3, no survivors at all.
Gee.
But anyhow, I said, these guys that were hunting on these bottoms, north of Trempealeau, the weather was worse than south. And at La Crosse, that I believe it was 30 inches of snow on that day. So I said, it was just unreal. And they didn't have the equipment to move the snow like we do nowadays.
Well, people didn't have, you know, things, they had shovels, right?
There you go.
They didn't have snow blowers.
And because the weather had been so nice, a lot of people didn't even have fire built in the house. It was nice yet. It's 50 degrees. I mean, they didn't have a little kitchen stove maybe for breakfast, and that threw enough heat for probably the rest of the day.
Well, it changes that fast.
So then they were trying to make fire yet on top of it and get things going. And air was so heavy, they said they couldn't catch their breath outside. So it was just unreal. I says the sudden change, the temperature we have here in Wisconsin.
And I did some informational reading last night on this storm, and they said that actually 85 duck hunters were killed.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's probably more people perish because of frozen fingers and toes and such.
Well, they said people did. There were a lot of people that did lose fingers and toes.
Yeah, because I said the weather had been so bad.
Ears, they lost part of their ears.
The storm had hit out in Minnesota. It hit about 1 o'clock in the evening. And one farmer out there, I was online, I was watching, he says that there was such a nice day, they had let the chickens out. And he said that we had a lot of younger pullets at the time. He said, well, them doggone pullets, they went and sat in the trees. And he said, well, I don't know if you had to do that as a kid, but go shag that chicken out of that tree to get them back in the coop for night. And he said, we got tired of doing that. Ma told us, leave them till morning. We'll pick them up in the morning. He said, and we did pick them up. They froze to death.
They were also talking about, remember how people used to raise turkeys outside?
Yes.
I think it was, actually there were some turkeys over here by Trempealeau that, you know, they were outside and they froze.
They got wet, then they froze them.
Yep.
And the farmers were selling them birds for 25 cents a bird.
Right.
Frozen turkeys that come with feathers and everything. Yeah. I mean, that's the way you got your turkey. So I said, we maybe have bad weather here in Wisconsin nowadays, we think, but we don't have the snow we had, I don't believe, as we did as children. I remember digging down on a highline pole where it would say danger, high voltage. And if there was a snowbank from the snowplow, you had to dig down to find that sign.
Yeah. Nowadays,
if you get knee-deep snow, my gosh, look at the snow.
Yeah.
That's not snow like we had before. The weather is slowly changing. We have been adapting to it. But in 1940, these people were in dire, dire straits.
Because you couldn't take your iPad or your phone and look at, oh, okay, I guess we got to get out here because the storm is coming.
No GPS, there was nothing to help you, and you couldn't call for help. Nobody could get to you.
Yeah.
Every man for himself, basically, what it was. So I said a lot of people perished in the storm and as a result of the storm. And animals with them, you know.
Yeah, and they said that the limit there for ducks, you could kill 15 ducks.
Yeah.
And these guys who were having such a great time getting these ducks, they were, they were killing all these ducks, that they just kind of didn't even pay attention to the weather for a while.
They're just happy that they were having a good day, you know.
Yeah.
And with a matter of 4 hours, we went from a nice day to dying.
And then there are, besides the duck hunters, the snow really caught people in their cars.
Oh yeah, I said it was all over. I said people couldn't get in. Some children claim their parents wouldn't let them out of the house because they could not find the barn.
Oh,
the wind was so bad. And
like a blizzard.
You did the story about that children's blizzard.
Right.
Same thing.
Yeah.
The children they tied them with ropes between each one so that they wouldn't get lost, because the minute you got a couple feet away, you couldn't find one.
And I'm going to put a link here to that children's blizzard video that Mary and I did, because it was the same situation. It was January. It was a warm day, and they'd had a bunch of cold weather, but a warm day. Everybody was out visiting. They went to town. The kids went to school.
Yeah.
They weren't wearing coats. And the same deal. The Alberta Clipper hit the warm air coming up from the Gulf, and they had this big blizzard, and it dropped. The temperature dropped really quickly, and it was the same deal.
So I said, we never can take weather for granted here in Wisconsin.
No.
But I said,
and I just, when I'm reading about this, I just can't imagine those poor families, the people that were at home and not knowing where their, their husbands and
where
fathers
Dad is, or
and
where
kids,
my brother or uncle
where
went.
they were.
Yeah,
they had no idea.
And like I said, these islands, I said, were all kind of created because of it was swampier land because of the Mississippi flyaway here. But I says, when they put the dams in, then it started flooding all these ponds and making such a great duck habitat for migration. So I said, these hunters knew where to go and they knew when to go. And a lot of them had that secret spot way back someplace, which was another nail in their coffin, you might say, because you couldn't get to them. You couldn't help them.
And there were people that died just in their cars. They tried to stay warm in the cars, and it got so cold.
So
it was way below zero.
It's just and at those days, the heaters in those cars were not the best.
No.
I said, when we were younger, I said, you were surprised you had a heater.
Yeah, that's true.
So things were different. It was kind of like the wipers. The faster you went, the slower they go.
Yeah. So I don't know if we've missed anything else here. I think we've pretty much covered the tragedy. And
yeah, like I said, it's unfortunate these hunters got trapped out here, but it was just the timing was wrong and the weather was bad, and you were in the right place at the wrong time.
Well, Jim, I think this was an interesting show, and 80 years ago, so there's probably people that maybe still remember
There's a few that remember, and here's a few of the guys that probably don't know it, but they're the cause of all the troubles we talked about today. Survivors that got away, I guess. They must have made the storm also.
Yeah. So we're down here at the Trempealeau Refuge, and folks, if you haven't been down here, it's free. You can drive down here, you can come on this platform. They've got like viewing telescope things, and you can see some real wildlife down here.
Trempealeau County has got a lot of little history, little bitty pockets of secret places. People don't really realize the good values we have and the scenic beauty that we have in our county.
And if this was up by the Twin Cities, there'd be all kinds of people here.
Yeah. We live in a driftless area, and people don't realize how good we got it.
Yeah.
People come from all over just to come and look at all the hills here.
That's right.
But the glaciers went around us, and they preserved us that part of history here.
We're unique.
We're unique in the state.